everyone, and welcome to another episode of Page Turners Plus. November 7th, 2022 marks a special date for us because it makes 1 year since our first episode of Page Turners Plus aired when we reviewed Money Groffy's The Mermaid of Black Conch. Today, we have another show for you, and we'll be reviewing Cecil Browne's work, Cassie P, Caribbean PI, and The Hat for Lemer. To tell you a bit more about Cecil Browne, we have Paula.
Thank you, Roll J. Cecil Browne is a Vincentian British writer. He grew up in St. Vincent and the Grenadines until his early teens, and then he moved to the United Kingdom. He's been a mathematics lecturer for more than 35 years. He enjoys cricket, writing, and music. His short story Coming Off the Long Run, was published in an anthology in 2018. The anthology is called So Many Islands, and he finished writing Cassie P, Caribbean PI in 2019.
And to tell you a bit about the book, we have Kesua.
Thanks, Roll J. Cassie Providence, PI, is an unusual Caribbean woman, a happily married, child-free, talented private investigator. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, she solves a range of petty and serious crimes, some of which hit a little too close to home sometimes. Cassie's aided by a number of sidekicks, though none are more faithful than her husband, who she met when they were both serving police officers. Depicting the vibes, tastes, and quirks of Caribbean daily life, Cassie P is reminiscent of a karate-chopping Jessica Fletcher, on good terms with everyone in her small community, and keen to help folk with a perplexing problem only their friendly local PI can solve. A delightful series of adventures awaits the reader.
Thank you very much, Kesua. We could get started.
Roll J, may I interject before you start asking the prepared questions?
Yes.
I noticed that Kesua described Cassie P as child-free. Child-free, to my mind, connotes a choice, and it connotes that the person is happy with her status as not being a parent. But that isn't quite the case with Cassie P as I read the novel. I think the novel suggests very strongly, in fact, that Cassie P is not child-free by choice. I think it suggests that she has fertility issues. I don't know if you remember that scene in the market with her husband Joel's market lady, and the market lady is basically saying, when are you going to, when is Joel going to make a proper woman of you? And Cassie P essentially ran off from that conversation. And then there is another scene, I don't remember, it's later on in the novel, where the issue of fertility problems comes up. And Cassie P is certainly not happy. That is my reading of it, with the fact that she is childless, not child-free.
If I think back, I'm going to respond to that quite directly, Paula. And so I was quite deliberate in my words in. I said she's happily married and child-free. So whether or not she's happy about being childless, as you say, she's certainly happily married, I think. The child bit, I'm happy to suggest with your suggestion that she would rather have children than not. She clearly has, I think, a maternal instinct. I think that comes through quite clearly, particularly in, I think, one of the very early stories. But I think it's an interesting choice, whether it's fertility issues or a choice, that Cecil Browne has decided to create a main character who is a woman, who is a private investigator in quite a kind of 1950s TV sense of the word. And she doesn't have any children. And whether that's because he thinks the police life is not compatible with the family life, or for some other reason, I think that's something hopefully we'll get the chance to discuss with him. I do think it's interesting and worth noting.
But then there's also a deeper message there because, I know certainly in the Caribbean and perhaps other parts of the world, like a lot of people tend to place a lot of pressure on women and say, well, when are you going to get a child? When are you going to become a woman? When many women face fertility issues, abuse issues, and they just either can't or don't want to have children. So I think in the novel there, it highlighted a greater issue that our societies face, where people place a lot of pressure on women and think that becoming a mother is the mark of womanhood when it really isn't. So yeah, just wanted to add that in there.
It's interesting because, sorry, I actually saw her running off, and the other answer she gave to those questions quite the opposite way from Paula. That in fact she doesn't want kids, but she doesn't want to tell anyone that because she knows that their reaction will be, "What? How come?" Right? So I think there are a couple of different ways to interpret her 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 response to those situations.
Yeah,
I,
if I may jump in on this conversation, uh, Paula, well, to use an American baseball phrase, you just threw a curveball in the first pitch of the game. You're starting off. We didn't even get into this book yet, and here you go with a what we call a 9-6 bender that froze us at the plate. Maybe, but yes, that was something that did come out in my reading of the text, especially. Yeah, the scene with Mother Hindi uh, and her conversation there, and I did feel that she was trying to be nice to the old lady and not really reveal something that she and Joel had already made a choice about. And then later on, I think the last story, uh, with the Verity case, the Baptiste Verity case, the very end, um, it seemed to me that Cassie was being nice to Verity's wife. I can't remember her name right now, um, but that it seemed like she had pretty much kind of brushed her off to say that, okay, well, we're trying. When in fact, for me, it seemed as though they had already made a choice. But again, that's up for interpretation, and it's an interesting choice that Cecil Brown has made in terms of his main character being a married woman, a young married woman at that. I mean, we don't know exactly how old she is, but I don't think she's probably past 40. But a young married woman in a Caribbean setting who does not have a child.
And we knew it was going to happen, so we might as well make that comparison with Jacob Ross's main character, female, similarly a police officer, who does have a child, and that's a big part of her story. In fact, she's not only a mother; that's a huge part of how she ends up in the situation we see her in the Bone Readers. I think it is a really interesting choice on Cecil Brown's part to choose to make a kind of unashamedly female character. That's a really weird choice. I don't know why I said unashamedly, but to really go for this female character, and I think he plays a big he puts a lot of there are a lot of kind of little ways that he kind of makes you sense that she's a regular woman. You know, she's caring, she's compassionate, she's empathetic. She's not, I think sometimes you think of female police officers that you see on TV cop shows where there's something masculine about them. I think it's very careful to make sure that we understand she is feminine. She has this super loving relationship with her husband. She's very kind and compassionate to the people she comes across, and she isn't a mother, and that does appear to be a choice.
the issue of masculinity and regular femininity. Well, I don't know if there's any such thing, but but that's another issue. Um, when I was reading the novel, when Cassie P described women, she did not sound like a woman to me. She sounded like how men speak of women. Um, well, not a heterosexual woman. She didn't sound to me like a heterosexual woman when she was describing what women look like. Um, I don't know if I see some of you nodding. I don't know if you want to tell me your thoughts on it.
I'm in complete agreement. I actually highlighted a passage that at first I hadn't quite figured it out until like maybe the fourth or fifth story. When she was describing Ingrid Graves, remember Indra Graves, sorry.
Is this the
That's
woman that
when,
the men fight over?
yes, that's when it hit me. It was really, really obvious. And I was like, all right, this is what has been kind of odd for me while reading the book. Women do not describe other women like this. We don't care about the size and shape of their breasts. Like, we just don't do that, right? So that's when it really hit me that, yeah, that was off. That was not a woman's voice.
And I just
I
want to
can't stop
point out,
laughing.
I just want to point out that women do describe other women as beautiful, but not that way.
I,
Cassie speaks of women's beauty in a sexual way. That's just not how heterosexual women speak of other women. Doesn't happen.
I mean, I think it's only like on the one hand, for us, it's obvious that like that's not how women look at other women because I think it's also about perception. The first thing we see in another woman, and I actually don't know that women have a different experience in a sense as well. But it's not a sexual. Our relationship isn't primarily about their physical appearance or our personal attraction to them. That's not how women relate to each other. I think more generally, in the same way that I'm not sure it's how men relate to each other, but I wouldn't be able to say. And I think that's what's different. That's when you're just like, that's not how when we see a woman, we're noticing her smile or her warmth or her her humanity, for lack of a better word, not our personal response sexually to them.
Yeah, that wasn't lost on me. I think the first time that uh, Cassie is describing a woman, uh, I was like, oh, dang. Uh, I don't know no women who describe other women like that. Um, there's a way. My mother describes women in a certain way, not too flattering sometimes, but it's nothing like the way Cassie was describing women. I definitely it was like, okay, come on, bro. Um, you writing as a man right now, and, and you writing as a straight man, looking at these women, and yeah, that I caught that from the very beginning. So I think that's a problem in the text because it persists. It wasn't I don't think we'd be talking about it if it was just one time. But there's this persistent pattern in which Cassie is sizing up both men and women, and she describes men in a certain way as well. But for the women, it's yeah. I think Francine said it was sexualized, and I read it. I read it the same way.
I also think it's the other way of looking at it, of course, is that he does such a good job of inhabiting the female character the rest of the time that it comes out when he describes women. That's when you're kind of like, hang on a second, what's going on here? So that's a compliment in a way because it's just one thing that he does that you go, I don't think this is a woman speaking anymore, which means the rest of the time I actually believe there was a woman speaking, right? I think is the flip side.
But then even when he was referring to the actions of men towards women, you could tell that it was a man writing it. And I think from the very first story in the novel, I thought that it would have been problematic and difficult for a man to write about a woman PI in the Caribbean, just because, for example, I think he'd be coming in with a lot of stereotypes of what he thinks a woman and what a woman PI should be, and that turned out to be very true in the story, in the way he described other women and the way he used the male characters, for example Joel, to describe women, and the way he was like, Joel was eyeing up my legs or something to that. The way it was described in the novel, I could tell as a man that it was a man writing it. So I think, to answer the question of did Cassie's voice sound like a woman, I mean, I'm not a woman, but no. It sounded like a man. I could say that. Cassie's voice sounded like a man.
I don't think he did all the time though, and I think her actions didn't always sound like a man. I think some of her responses, I think particularly if I remember the story of the two sisters, and some of the ways that her brain worked, like there was something I don't know how to do it without getting into like strong gender binaries, but like there was something feminine about her a lot of the time, and it did feel like a woman a lot of the time. Um, some of the way that she was kind of gentle with all the people around her, that she was kind of like I described her as a kind of Jessica Fletcher character, and I think that that's that's how it what felt most familiar. I think, she's this kind of slightly kindly old woman, but as Eric points out, she's not actually that old. Um, so she's real kind of like a community kind of stalwart without being an elderly member of the community. And I think the reason I think she's like Jessica Fletcher as well is, like if I don't know if okay, everyone knows who I'm talking about when I say Jessica Fletcher. I don't need to explain it, but she's this woman who just seems to know so many people like accused of murder. Like she's in this really small town, but there's just so much murder happening around her all the time. And it's a peaceful, quiet, friendly town, but people keep getting killed. And it's kind of the same, right? And also you never see the same character twice except for the police officer. And again, like St. Vincent is like it's ain't not that big, like a bit like Cabot Cove, right? I don't know why I sound like a Meta She Wrote aficionado here, but roll with it. But similarly, like one thing that I think struck me by the end of the novel is how come we never saw any character like in a second novel? You thought, they might bump into someone in the street from the first story or something. And that didn't really happen. It might have happened once, but I don't remember it happened in any way that was kind of believable, actually. So
That's probably because the, all the stories are disconnected. They stand alone, which I also think is a problem in the working of it. So this is in terms of the structure. Um, well, how many? Six, basically
Yes,
standalone,
6. Yeah.
six standalone short stories, and which is fine if you want to do it that way. I don't have a particular um, position on it, but I think to your point, Kesua, for a novel of this length and in that setting, and also the way that even how Cassie is describing people and places, it would seem that for example, she would have known who Leroy Verity was before she took the case.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, Eric, that I found it strange. I think we learn in the novel that St. Vincent is a small society where everybody knows each other and everybody knows each other's business. However, as you said, like there's no interconnection between the stories, and as Kessel said, no one really turns up in more than one story, and I did find that odd because it's like Cassie and Joelle seem to know everybody, but like nobody else knows each other. I did find that was kind of strange because I think more than once it was mentioned that one character or the other said, "Oh, well, everybody knows X or everybody knows Y," but yet somehow there were things that people didn't know. So
And then some of the characters in the individual stories were also infamous. For example, like it seems like the sisters, even Cassie's father. Yet there's no connection with them in other stories. Other than the story that they were actually focused in. So that was quite strange as well.
and it's unfortunate as well, right, as storytelling, because you can't have them on the one hand being infamous throughout this small space, but yet nobody knows about them in the next context, right? It doesn't make sense. And if you think in terms of storytelling, I think it's a weakness. Because if you think about a story like August Town, right, by Kai Miller, some of the magic in that is the way that we find out later on that these different stories that are happening are actually all connected. Like that's the magic of the storytelling, how that reveal happens, um, or how that is revealed. Um, and there's another story as well. I think we saw. I think we commented when we read the Bone Readers, not the Bone Readers. Sorry, Black Rain Fallen. How we'd previously seen one of the main characters, one of the quiet characters. Sorry, in Black Rain Fallen, he kind of turns up dead. Sorry, no spoilers, but he turns up dead in Black Rain Fallen. But we'd seen him in a previously, and it was a secondary character the whole time. It was never a main character. But the point is, in this context of this one island, you're gonna cross people in different contexts because if it's that smaller place that everyone knows each other, then it stands to reason that when a crime happens, there is some kind of connection, even if these people are secondary characters to the main action that we're following. And I think that was kind of, and I think it's the magic of storytelling when these things all kind of come together, right? And so that was a real kind of missed opportunity, I think.
Well, I think this would be a good time for us to take a reading from Cecil Browne. And so we're going to pause for that and stay tuned.
Hello, my name is Cecil Browne, and I'm going to read you a little section from Cassie P. the Caribbean's first female private investigator. I'm starting from the beginning, introducing Cassie P. Some women I know began to fret when they hit the big trio, but not me. 2014 felt a kick where it hurt. For in that year, Cassie Providence began to make her mark as a private detective. From that time, as one of the top 3 investigators in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, when I took on your case, you could rely on my training in the police force. And to be sure, if you look at a woman and only see shape and face, where will you find yourself but in peril? 5'4", medium build, I have a heart-shaped face and a head full of soft hair. The satin black skin, rich eyebrows, and almond-shaped eyes, I have to thank our Caribbean history for that. My friends don't think of me as tough, but they know I can defend myself. In the Thomas case that really set me on the way, 2 people got physical and both had to crawl away. I was just climbing out of a steep crab hole when my career took off. A call deep into the night was how the whole thing began. Joel, the phone, I grunted at dawn, nudging that vagabond husband of mine gently in the ribs. Go and check who. Night is for sleeping. Didn't the blasted idiot provoking the house phone know that? Unless my father was critical or my mother. Why would anyone call at that hour? I buried my face in the pillow. Joel might give in an answer, but no luck. Vagabond was in the land of dreams. Get the phone now. I tried again. Darling, sweetheart, leave it. Joel rolled onto his back. It's probably a wrong number. This time of the morning? You just wait. See if I don't catch you. I sighed and rolled out of bed, snorting like a sour piglet. Ring off now, I called out. Stop now is me and you. Mrs. Providence? Cassie Providence? Yes, I mumbled. This is Mr. Thomas. Who? I grumbled this time. Big man Thomas. I asked him. What you want, big man? Why you waking me up at this hour? Sorry, Mrs. Providence, he came back. But I have a problem. What kind of problem? My daughter Lynette, she didn't come home last night. Why are you telling me that? You do a bit of detective work, don't you? Yes, I answered swiftly. No point telling him it was 6 weeks since my last proper case. A little bird chirped your name to me. It said you're an investigator. I switched on my brain, hoping he couldn't hear me rummaging on the table for paper and ink. Let me get my notebook. Of course, I was an investigator. If I didn't believe in my work, what was I doing answering the phone at cockcrow? Give me the story, big man, I said. Start from the beginning. Lynette is an assistant manager in a supermarket in Kingston, he explained after clearing his throat. She started as a cashier and worked her way up. No problems at home, and she's happy at work. But for some reason, me and her mother can't figure out, she didn't make it home. My wife is on medication. You have to help us.
Welcome back. Before we took the break, we were speaking about how the individual stories in Cassie P, Caribbean PA, seemed a bit too individual, where there was no connectivity between each story, even though it was presented in the same novel. So I think a good jump off point would be to also discuss another of Cecil's short stories, and to place it in context, given that, of course, he was shortlisted for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize this year for it. So in Cassie P, most of the characters speak English most of the time. In his story this year, Hat for Lemer, it is narrated in Vincentian. Do you have any thoughts about the use of language in each of these works?
I was very happy to see that A Hat for Lemer was written in Vincentian, because one of the difficulties I had with Cassie P is that the language didn't feel natural. Um, the characters, like, for example, the market lady, was speaking English the way somebody who went to girls' high school speaks English. There was also the van driver who was speaking English the way somebody who went to St. Vincent Boys Grammar School speaks English. I don't even speak English like that. I don't speak English consistently. We're all colonized. So when I see a TV camera, I code switch. But we all know, we all colonize. So we code switch automatically. You don't even think about it. But if there's no TV camera on me, I do not sound like this. I sound like a Caribbean woman speaking a version of speaking a Caribbean English. And I speak the English that we're taught in school only on only in formal settings, never ever in a casual setting. So I was very disturbed by the fact that all the characters, every single character in Cassie P was speaking English most of the time. Occasionally I saw a sentence structure that looked Vincentian, but I don't know. I don't know if I have a prejudice because I live here, and so I'd like to hear from the rest of you how you felt about the language, how language was treated in Cassiope. I was happy about how it was treated in A Hat for Them.
Yeah, great points. Criticisms there, Paula. Um, I think once I got into the text in Cassie P, it was like, interesting. There's no, yeah, there's no local flavor
Mhm.
in the language as I've been accustomed to in reading other 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 works of fiction this whole year and in the last couple of years. Um, Interesting choice. And then yeah, I did read Half and as I'm reading, I'm wondering if Cecil Brown made that choice because it's set in 1858 rather than I don't know contemporary times. Maybe he's in his mind. Vincentians talk uh, what we might call straight quote unquote standard English. I don't know. Right. I don't talk to my mama the way I present in class or talk to my friends. Um, our English, African vernacular English is quite elastic. Uh, so yeah, I wouldn't expect Leroy Verite, uh, the sound like a BBC presenter or at least like Adrian Lester, playing in Hustlers. So good point.
I'm slightly offended about the Adrian Lester comment because I feel like, wait, what's going? Yeah, I'm gonna be quiet though. But I think we can. One thing I will say is, although this is not When We Were Birds, I think we can all agree. And Lloyd Banwell's work that we loved earlier this year. Um, I do think he does something similar to what I think Jacob Ross does in terms of the metaphors and the similes. He tries to anchor those in the Caribbean, if not the actual dialogue. And I think that's all I'll say.
Yes, I think he does well with metaphors and similes. That I think he does quite well.
Yes, I definitely noticed that, but I also did think that the dialogue in standard English between the Vincentians was kind of, I don't know, off key for me.
I want to
Because
fight
I
with
mean,
Francine at the term standard English.
well, I
But
mean,
anyway, no, I know that's another fight.
right, but it's hard to find. I mean, I don't want to call it well, we can't even call it the Queen's English anymore. I don't want to call it that. I don't want to call it proper English either.
Should we
To
call it
uh, to
monarchical English?
to imply that any other English isn't proper.
Kesawa,
So
I like
I
that. I like monarchical
monarchical
English. Let's call
English,
it
right?
that. As
Let's
that
call it
as of
that.
now, Page Turners Plus
But
will call it monarchical English.
Then it keeps the power dynamics in play, right? That's how they speak, and the rest of us are but plebiscites.
right.
Plebiscites? Not plebiscites. That's not what I mean. Um, plebeians.
But the language definitely felt unnatural. And even if one were to hazard a guess and say that Cassie P was very educated or educated overseas, I mean, she's established herself in St. Vincent and communicating with certain people, so certain local people in St. Vincent, she would not be using standard English. And also, given her role as a private investigator, which was like part-time Mako, I don't think she'd be going around to the market and speaking to people in monarchical English. That just did not seem natural at all.
Okay, all right. Related to this point, I found a plenty trite expressions throughout these short stories. Uh, as I mean, I know people do refer to themselves sometimes in what in third person, but I don't think there's space for that in, I would say, an attempt at serious literary fiction, unless you as a writer has established this particular quirk in a character, and especially a main character. So there were a lot of trite expressions, um, turns of phrases that, to be honest, I rolled my eyes at, and just like, oh yeah, just oh. So maybe this is related to the previous point about the use of the choice to use quote unquote standard English by all of the characters. I don't know. I'm we at a loss here. I think we have to ask some questions of the writer.
Eric, you refer to this as literary fiction. I don't think he meant for it to be literary fiction. Um, it just isn't. This is not literary fiction. I don't think it pretends to be. I think this is a whodunit, and it's on that plane. It's written on that plane. So I think certainly some of the dissatisfaction that we are expressing um, is tied up in the with the fact that we are literary fiction readers. That is our preferred type of literature. So I don't know that we are necessarily being fair in our criticisms. It could be that someone who reads this genre would think, so why are they fussing so much? I think it's just we are not the audience for this kind of for this kind of book. I think it may be as simple as that, and maybe we're just not being fair. I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm glad you actually used the word audience because that was gonna be my follow on from the bit about the language. Because whenever I think about why an author chose to write a book a certain way, especially Caribbean authors, like why are they choosing to use Caribbean English or why are they choosing to use non-Caribbean English? Like, what audience do they have in mind for the book? And I wonder if maybe, this was aimed at a British audience. And then exactly like you said, Paula, the audience in terms of the genre of book that it is. I can easily, I mean, this is a book that if you felt like, reading something humorous and fun set in the Caribbean, this would hit all of those. I mean, quite a lot of humor in it. There's quite a lot of Caribbean flavor in it. I mean, you can tell it's set in the Caribbean, and we're talking about Caribbean people. Some of the expressions, talking about the food. I mean, he describes the island quite a bit. He mentions, the Caribbean Sea, and so if you're looking for a fun, humorous read set in the Caribbean with quirky characters, then this book would definitely fit all of that criteria.
I think I'd like to jump in on the British audience thing as well as the resident Brit on the panel. Um, and I do think we can think about Cassie P as a response to the phenomena that is phenomenon. Oh my lord, my English today, huh? The phenomenon that is Death in Paradise, so the BBC series set in the Caribbean, set on a fictional island, which is supposed to be Marie Gallant off the coast of Guadeloupe, or Guadeloupe sister isle, probably more appropriate and politically correct. But actually, a very much a BBC version of it in the sense that it is, for one reason or another, the head of the police detective murder squad team is always a white man, freshly from Britain, and the characters change, but that's always the kind of dynamic that they set up. Um, and if you ever get to the chance to watch it, there are so many reasons to be infuriated as a black person with any kind of pride, as a Caribbean person who loves the Caribbean. And the BBC make that program, I think, relatively unapologetically for white British people who need a summer break. It comes on in February when it's the coldest point of the year, and you're like, imagine this other place where there are so many white people. Like, there's just not that many white people in the Caribbean. Like, this is in the whole of the Caribbean as there are in Death in Paradise. Um, and I can imagine, and I don't know Cecil Brown's reason for writing this book, but I can imagine it as a response to that, the way that he locates these stories in Caribbean communities where everybody is a local, if you like. There isn't this foreign character where the main investigator is actually a local person who loves the local community and is trying to make it a better place. And the references to daily life, those details that the BBC gets wrong, I think he gets right. The way that people interact, even if they don't speak the dialogue in a way that seems familiar, the fact that there's a van driver or a market lady, like, these characters are absolutely absent from the stories that the BBC tells. So I think in that sense, I think he's definitely focused on a British audience. I can imagine it being for a black British audience who are like vexed about Death in Paradise, who don't watch it or do watch it for the visuals of the Caribbean that they love, but feeling a disconnect from it at the same time because it doesn't represent the Caribbean that they love. Or for people that like Death in Paradise but wouldn't mind reading about it and a more realistic version of the Caribbean. So I think it comes to audience. I don't know if that's his decision and that's why he's written it the way he has, but I can definitely see that being a reason.
And in as much as we've discussed why this is not our kind of literature, this panel, I want to highlight one of the ways in which it is our kind of literature. So the way he represents beauty is the way that this panel would appreciate representations of beauty. He described when he describes beautiful women, they look like us. They look like African Caribbean women. So his politics are probably not very different than ours. In fact, I suspect his politics are very similar, if not the same as ours. It's just that his aesthetic is not the same as ours. In A Hat for Lemer, though, the aesthetic of A Hat for Lemer is more in keeping. So I found it more in keeping with my taste in literature. I thought it was more complex than Cassie P. Caribbean PI. I don't know if the others of you thought so, or if that was just me.
No, I agree to an extent, um, that it was definitely a mm, it it historical fiction, uh, and it tells an interesting story. What, 20 years after emancipation, and the way that certain people, certain white folk, and one of the characters is described as a white Creole, um, of how, like, Lima, how she looks upon a white Creole person, and also how maybe the society looks upon freshly arrived people from Great Britain. So this play, this cultural play, which is also a historical play of ethnicity and place in society, power dynamics. Uh, that comes out in that short story, which, on the other hand, in Cassie P, and I think this is to your point, Paula, and believe me, it wasn't lost on me. I mentioned that this might have been an attempt at literary fiction, but it does read differently than literary fiction. I don't think that I don't know. I don't know if Cecil Brown had that intent in mind. I don't know, but two different types of literature here. Not just short story versus longer form, but two different types. And I appreciate the short story more than the novel, because of the richness. I saw some richness in the short story that I saw lacking in the novel.
I was gonna say, I think Eric was taking a lot of time to say not a lot. I would say, Eric, that the writing in the short story is a lot sharper than in the novel. Like, let's be real.
No, I also think that the short story would appeal to us more because it's politically intentional. And we all know, the five of us, we love politics. so I think that alone would have sold it on us. The fact that he sets the story 20 years after emancipation, that he kind of suggests what is happening in education. It's a very small suggestion, but then he also talks about how easily a white British person can come into the Caribbean and represent himself as something he is not and be accepted. And this is still true. Be accepted by Creole whites in the Caribbean just on the basis of his whiteness. He is valuable just on the basis of his whiteness. And so, and that still happens in the Caribbean. I still see white Creole Caribbean people embracing questionable white people from overseas. Still happening.
Yeah, sorry, Eric, that was a bit harsh what I said there, but but I just I
Fine.
was. I'm glad you're not taking it personally. I in my other life, when in my historical research, this reminds me of reading newspapers in the 1930s or the 1920s in the Caribbean and seeing these adverts, like a little classified on like the bottom of the front page, like white person can type looking for work. And I remember seeing it and being like, what a weird thing to put. Like, why are they like it's a weird advert? And I've read it, it's only when I've seen it a few places and a few times I've been like, oh, because they can't just turn up to the plantation and be like, I hear you got jobs. They need like work appropriate for a white person. Yeah, they can't just look for it, and so they're advertising themselves as a white person who's recently arrived in need of and they've got like random experience, like I can bookkeep. Or like, but they don't know anyone, so they're just putting an advert in the local newspaper so white people know there's a new white person in town to hire, because that white person knows that the other jobs for the blacks would not be appropriate, and the white people don't want him working with the blacks like a regular, like I was like, wow, these like. So I mean, like, this is obviously not the present, but I can also vouch for it being the true in the early 20th century.
Do you think there's room for A Hat for Lemer to become a full novel?
Oh yeah, there's a lot there. There is a huge amount there. I think that could be a really good novel. But he couldn't approach it the way he has approached this novel. He has to dig deeper into creating character. I think he has to do more with setting. I was wondering too if I know that Kesawa was saying he did the local flavor in terms of setting and food, or was it Francine? Very well. But I was wondering if, for example, he speaks of uh, Cassie will be moving from one village to the next. And what Cecil Browne does is he just mentions the village names. I thought if he described the surroundings, it would have been a lot better for people who don't know what he's speaking about. Because for example, he says in one passage, I turned left at the roundabout. No, there's only one place in St. Vincent and the Grenadines we call the roundabout. We actually have two roundabouts, but there's only one place we call the roundabout. And everybody in St. Vincent and the Grenadines would know what that is and would know the direction in which he's going. And I was wondering I knew that somebody who is not familiar with St. Vincent and the Grenadines wouldn't know what that meant. And there's another point where he sees Mrs. Jefferson outside Music Center. Nobody other than a Vincentian would know where the Music Center is. And there was this, before we were wondering whether I think it was Kesawa who was suggesting that maybe he was writing it for a Black British audience. I felt when I was reading it that he was writing it for a Vincentian audience because there are so many assumptions in the text that you would only get if you were Vincentian.
Yeah,
That's
that was my point. That's a point. That's a great point because I did not feel that I was pulled into the setting because a writer has to talk about the scene, whatever it is, the stench of the garbage, the beauty and color of the flora and fauna, um, the hub, the buzz of the people in the market. I don't feel as that I got pulled in. All right.
On that same point, he would, for example, he would say something like, the landscape is beautiful, the Caribbean Sea is breathtaking, but he doesn't describe, he doesn't say, for example, the sea was blue black and racing. That is how you pull a reader into the scenery. You don't just say the sea is there and it's beautiful. Tell us why it's beautiful. Describe what is beautiful about it. And so if he were to make a Hat for Lemma into a longer work, I would hope that he would pay attention to things like that.
I am really glad you said that, Paula. Partly because one of the things I thought was, does this for someone from St. Vincent, is it more familiar? Because I remember for me, I felt like it feels like the Caribbean, a Caribbean island, but I can't, like as Eric said, I can't see St. Vincent compared to somewhere else. Like I've been to Caymanas Augustin, and I feel like I could probably walk around it and find my way around. I wouldn't because it sounds very dangerous, um, but like a kind of real strong sense of place, like Eric was describing. I also don't know if Hat for Lemma would work as a novel, only because it feels like, for the reasons that you outlined, the depth that I think is probably lacking a little bit, and the reason why, in the way he writes short stories. I think what he could do perhaps is write a Hat for Lemma, or the novel version of it, set in the 1850s, which would be fantastic. I would love to read it, even if it was done in the same style of Cassie P with these different short stories. But I'd like to see them connected. I'd like to see the characters reappear in different stories. I think that would be magical for me. Then I'd be like, okay, he's done a good thing here. I just want to jump in and say that.
I think that's a good ending point, Kesua, because we've run out of time. But we have an interview lined up with Cecil Browne, so there will be a lot more of Cassie P and Hat for Lemmer on our discussion at that time. So thank you for joining us. And once again, we are celebrating our 1 year anniversary of doing Page Turners Plus, and it has been quite an amazing journey. Thank you for tuning in religiously every month, and do have a lovely day.